The driveway looked exactly the same as it always had. Same cracked concrete. Same half-dead rosebush my mother kept saying she'd replace. Same flag my father hung crooked every 4th of July and never straightened. I sat in my car for a full 2 minutes before I got out. Not because I was nervous. I'd stopped being nervous about coming home years ago. What replaced it was something harder to name. A kind of bracing, the way you tighten your jaw before a dentist appointment. Not fear, just the body's memory of pain. My sister's car was already there. Of course it was. She was always first to arrive at these things, which meant she'd had the most time to set the narrative before I walked through the door. I grabbed my bag off the passenger seat and got out. The meeting had been my father's idea. He'd called it a family check-in, which was the kind of phrase that sounded reasonable on the phone and meant absolutely nothing in practice. What it actually meant was, everyone drives to the house, we sit around the dining table that still has the same plastic cover on it from 2009, and we talk about whatever my sister decides we need to talk about. That's not cynical, that's just accurate. I'd learned a long time ago that in my family, there were two kinds of people, the ones who spoke and the ones who were spoken about. My sister had always been the former. I had always been the latter. I knocked, even though it was my parents' house, because walking in unannounced felt like an invitation for my sister to say something about boundaries. She would do that. She'd done it before. My mother opened the door and hugged me in that distracted way she had. The kind of hug where her eyes were already moving past me to check if I'd parked in the right spot. "You made it," she said, like I'd driven through a blizzard instead of 40 minutes on the interstate. "I made it," I said. My father was in his recliner. He raised his hand at me. That was our relationship in a gesture. Not cold, not warm, just present. He was a man who showed up and considered that sufficient, and honestly, for most of my childhood, it was more than I'd known how to ask for. My sister was in the kitchen. I knew before I saw her because I could hear her. She had a particular volume she used in our parents' house, louder than she spoke anywhere else, because volume in that house had always been a form of authority. The louder you were, the more the room organized itself around you. "There she is," she said when I walked in. She was standing at the counter with a glass of wine she'd clearly poured from a bottle she brought herself, because our parents didn't keep wine in the house. That small detail, the wine she'd brought, the glass she was already holding at 11 in the morning, told me everything I needed to know about how she decided today was going to go. "Hey," I said. Her husband was at the kitchen table. He did the thing he always did, which was look at me and then immediately look at his phone, which I'd long ago stopped taking personally. He was a decent enough man who had learned that the safest position in my sister's orbit was slightly behind her and to the left. We all moved to the dining room. My mother had made sandwiches, which she did whenever she sensed tension, as if food could absorb it. My father brought his coffee. My sister sat at the head of the table, which technically wasn't hers to sit at, but no one said anything, because no one ever said anything. The first 20 minutes were fine. My father talked about his knee. My mother talked about his knee. My mother talked about the neighbor's dog. My sister's husband excused himself to take a call that I suspected was not a real call. Then my sister set down her wine glass and said, "So, we should probably talk about the real reason we're all here." My father looked at his coffee. My mother looked at his coffee. My mother looked at the sandwiches. I waited. "Mom and Dad are going to need help," my sister said, "with the house. With expenses, things are getting tighter." That was true. I knew it was true. My parents were both in their late 60s. My father's pension wasn't what it used to be, and the house needed work. The kind of work that accumulates when you've been telling yourself you'll get to it for 15 years. I'd been aware of this. I'd been thinking about it. "I've been looking at numbers," my sister continued, "and I think we need to talk about contributions. Monthly. From both of us." She looked at me when she said both of us. Not at my brother-in-law. Not at the theoretical family unit. At me, specifically, with a particular kind of look. The one that had a question inside it, and the question was, "Can you even do this?" "What kind of number are you thinking?" I asked. She named a figure. It was reasonable. It was actually quite reasonable, and I think that surprised me more than anything. I'd been ready for something outrageous. That works for me, I said. I watched something shift in her face. I don't think she'd expected me to agree that quickly. I mean, she said, I just want to make sure you can actually manage it. I know things have been. She paused, doing this thing she did where she let the pause carry the insult so she didn't have to. Uncertain, for you. Career-wise. There it was. I took a sip of water. Things are fine, I said. I just mean with the non-profit stuff, she said. And the way she said non-profit stuff was the same way someone might say your little hobby. She'd been saying it like that for 3 years. Since I left my corporate job to run a small foundation I'd started. Since I stopped making the kind of money that came with a title people recognized at dinner parties. I know what you mean, I said. I'm just being practical, she said. Someone has to be. My mother made a small sound, not quite a protest, and then went quiet. My father studied his coffee like it was a document he needed to sign. This was the script. This was how it always went. My sister would say something that landed between a concern and an insult, and everyone else in the room would find something else to look at, and I would sit with it, and then we'd all have sandwiches and drive home. Except that today wasn't that day. Not because I planned anything. Not because I'd arrived with some kind of strategy. It was just that my phone buzzed. I glanced at it out of habit. A text from a number I recognized, my lawyer's personal cell. She didn't text on personal cells unless something was finalized. It's done. Signed this morning. Congratulations. I read it once. Then I set the phone face down on the table. My sister was still talking. Something about property taxes, something about the roof. I heard the words, but they were coming from a distance, like a radio in another room. 3 years? 3 years of 18-hour days. 3 years of pitching, failing, rebuilding, pitching again. 3 years of my sister calling my work nonprofit stuff at family dinners while I quietly assembled something she had no idea existed. When I left my corporate job, I hadn't just left to run the foundation. I'd left because I had a plan, a longer one, a quieter one. The foundation was real. The work was real. But it was also the public-facing part of a structure I'd been building for years, piece by piece, in the spaces between everything else. A development company, small, to start. Properties in 3 states. A portfolio that had grown slowly, then quickly, the way these things sometimes do when you make the right decisions at the right moments and don't tell anyone about it, because the moment you tell people, they start having opinions about your risk tolerance. 2 months ago, a firm had approached me about acquiring the portfolio. Not the foundation. That was separate. That was always going to be separate. But the development arm. The properties. The 3 years of work I'd done in the margins of the life my family thought I was living. We'd been negotiating since March. This morning, apparently, it was done. Are you even listening? My sister said. I looked up. Yes, I said. I asked if you could realistically commit to a number. I thought about the text on my phone. I thought about the figure my lawyer had mentioned in our last call, the final number, the one I told myself I wouldn't think about until it was actually real. Yes, I said again. I can commit. To the number I mentioned? And more, I said. Silence. My sister tilted her head, the way she did when she thought she'd misheard something. What do you mean, more? I mean, I can cover more than the monthly figure, I said. I can cover the roof, and the property taxes, and probably whatever else needs doing. She laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not immediately. It started as something confused, almost genuinely amused, like she thought I was making a joke. That's, she started. The foundation closed a deal this morning, I said, which was not technically accurate, but was not technically inaccurate either, and I decided the details could wait. It's been in progress for a while. It went through this morning. The laugh stopped. She looked at me the way people look at a road when they realize they've been reading the map wrong. What kind of deal? She said. It wasn't really a question. It was the beginning of a recalibration. I could see it happening in real time, the way her certainty about what kind of person I was started to rearrange itself. The kind that means mom and dad don't have to worry about the house, I said. Or anything else really. For a while. My mother made a sound that was different from her earlier sounds. This one had something watery in it. My father put down his coffee cup. My sister's husband came back from his fake phone call at exactly the wrong moment, read the room, and sat down very quietly. I don't understand, my sister said. Which part? She opened her mouth. Closed it. This was not a thing that happened often. My sister, without words, she had always had words. She had a vocabulary for every version of me she'd ever decided I was. The idealistic one. The impractical one. The one who needed to be practical. The one who couldn't help with rent. She had never had vocabulary for this version. You should have said something, she said finally, and it came out strange, almost accusatory, like I'd withheld information I owed her. I didn't know how it would go, I said. These things aren't certain until they are. But you knew it was happening. I knew I was working on something. That's not, she stopped. Collected herself. That's not the same as telling your family. And there it was. The pivot. The reframe. Suddenly the issue wasn't my finances, it was my communication. Suddenly I had done something wrong by not sharing information about a private business transaction with the person who, 3 minutes ago, had implied I couldn't manage a monthly contribution. I didn't say any of that. I'd learned a long time ago that you don't win arguments by winning them. You're right, I said. I should have kept you more in the loop. She couldn't argue with that either, which meant there was nowhere for the conversation to go, and so it went quiet. My mother cried a little, the good kind, the overwhelmed kind. My father squeezed her hand, which was more physical affection than I'd seen from him in probably 10 years. I talked through what I was thinking for the house. New roof. The foundation issues in the east corner they'd been ignoring. The back steps. I said I'd set something up, an account, an arrangement, whatever was most useful, so they wouldn't have to think about it. A weekly call with an accountant friend of mine who could help them understand what they had and how to use it. I wasn't doing it to prove anything. That's the thing people assume when they hear a story like this. That the point was the look on my sister's face, the silence, the moment the scales tipped. And I won't pretend that moment didn't exist, or that part of me didn't sit with it for a beat longer than I needed to. But the truth is, I decided what I was going to do for my parents long before today. Long before this morning. Before the deal was finalized. When I started building the company I built, my parents were already in the back of my mind, not as motivation exactly, but as a quiet promise I'd made to myself, that if this worked, I wasn't going to let them spend their 60s anxious about property taxes. The deal just meant I could finally say it out loud. My sister left earlier than she'd planned. She said she had something with her kids, a reasonable excuse, an easy exit. She hugged my mother. She nodded at me, which was more than I'd expected, honestly. At the door she stopped. She had her keys in her hand and she was looking somewhere between me and the wall behind me. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't, I said. She pressed her lips together. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I looked at her, my sister, who had called my career nonprofit stuff for 3 years. Who had implied, in front of our parents at a table with plastic covering, that I couldn't manage a basic monthly contribution. Who had spent the better part of 2 decades establishing herself as the competent one, the practical one, the one who had figured things out in contrast to me. She wasn't trying to be cruel. I actually believed that. That was the complicated part. She wasn't malicious, not really. She was just so certain about who I was that she'd stopped looking. I know, I said again. She left. I helped my mother with the dishes. My father fell asleep in his recliner, which was the most comfortable thing I'd seen all day. I sat in the kitchen with my mother and we talked about things we almost never talked about. Her life before we were born. Her mother, what she'd wanted to be before she became a wife and then a parent. She was different when my sister wasn't in the room. Softer. Like a window opened. Before I left, I sat with my father while he was still half asleep and told him what I told my mother, that the house was taken care of, that they didn't have to worry. He opened one eye. Your sister's going to have a hard time with this, he said. I know. You going to be patient with her? I thought about it. I'll try. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to sleep. I drove home on the same interstate I'd driven in on, same 40 minutes, same view. But the inside of the car felt different. Not triumphant, that's not quite it. More like something that had been held at a low-level tension for a very long time had finally been set down. My sister would call eventually. Maybe next week. Maybe next month. She'd ask questions she should have asked years ago. She'd probably not apologize exactly, but she'd say something that functioned as an apology if you understood her language. I'd probably accept it. We'd probably settle into something that looked, from the outside, like a normal sibling relationship. It wouldn't be simple. Families never are. But I thought about something my mother had said while we were doing the dishes. Unprompted, just talking the way she talked when she felt safe. She said, "You are always the quiet one. I used to worry that meant you were sad. But I think it just meant you were paying attention." I wasn't sure she was right, but I wasn't sure she was wrong either. There are people in your life who look at you and see a fixed thing, a version of you they decided on years ago, in a year when maybe you were smaller than you are now. And they've been carrying that image ever since because it's easier than updating it. My sister had been carrying hers for a long time. What I hope, for her, is that this cracks it open a little. Not so that she sees me differently, but so that she starts to wonder what else she might be seeing wrong. About herself. About what she's built her sense of security on. I don't know if that'll happen, but I drove home with the windows down and the evening was cool, and the city lights were coming on ahead of me, and I thought I did the thing I set out to do. For my parents. For myself. Not to win. Not to finally be seen. Just to follow through on a promise I made quietly years ago when no one was watching. Those are the only promises worth making, I think. The ones you keep without an audience. I've thought a lot about that afternoon since it happened. Not obsessively, just the way you turn something over in your hands when you're trying to understand its shape. What strikes me most isn't the moment my sister went quiet. It's everything that had to happen before that moment, for it to mean anything at all. Because here's the thing about the years when no one believes in what you're building. They are long. They are genuinely, exhaustingly long. And the silence you keep during those years isn't dramatic. It doesn't feel like strategy. It just feels like getting up and doing the work again, and again, when the people sitting across from you at a dinner table have already decided who you are. My sister didn't invent the version of me she believed in. She assembled it from real evidence. The job I left, the salary I walked away from, the nonprofit work that didn't look like success from the outside. She wasn't imagining things. She was just interpreting them with the assumption that she already had the full picture. That's what I've come to understand about people who diminish you. Most of them aren't cruel. They're just certain. And certainty, when it hardens around an old image of someone, becomes its own kind of blindness. What I also understand now is that I had a choice, somewhere in those 3 years, about what to do with being unseen. I could have spent that energy trying to correct the impression. Explaining myself, defending the work, making the case again and again at tables where no one was really listening. I didn't. Partly out of stubbornness, partly out of exhaustion, and partly, if I'm honest, because I'd realized something. The work didn't need my sister's belief to grow. It just needed mine. And whatever small, stubborn, quiet part of me held on to that fact through every dismissive comment, every polite silence from my parents, every "that's nice, but..." That part of me was right. There's something I think about when I hear people talk about proving others wrong. The framing bothers me a little. Because if the point is to prove something to someone else, then they're still at the center of your story. They're still the measure. And I spent too many years letting my sister be the measure of my worth without even realizing I was doing it. The freedom came when I stopped. When I made the work about my parents, about the promise I'd made to myself, about the people and things I actually cared about, and let my sister's opinion become background noise. That's not a discipline you learn in a day. It's more like a muscle you build through 100 small decisions to focus back on what matters when the noise gets loud. To not perform your progress for people who've stopped looking. To trust the work even when the work is invisible. The afternoon at my parents' house will always be complicated for me. I sat across from my mother when she cried, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but grief. A little. Grief for how long she'd worried. Grief for how long I'd carried something alone that I didn't have to carry alone, if only things had been different. But they were what they were. And I think that's the only honest thing I can say about it. You can't build your life waiting for the conditions to be fair. The people around you will sometimes be wrong about you for years. You keep going anyway. You keep the promise anyway. And if the day comes when things shift, when the room finally sees what you've been building, you let it land quietly, without theater, not because humility is a performance, but because you realize somewhere along the way that you weren't doing it for the room.